Welcome to the West, A Narrative History. I'm Christina Morgan, and we're working on Chapter 7, The West's Medieval Civilizations, and this is going to be Part 2, Islam. And I want to just remind you that we're talking about religions now. We talked about the rise of Christianity in the last section. Today we're talking about Islam, but we're talking about how history shapes Western civilization. We're not talking about religious theology, so please don't take anything in here as a support or contradiction to something that you believe or that you disagree with. So Islam is a new Western religion or another Western religion that springs up that has a huge impact on Western civilization. Around 600, Arabia was a minor player on the world stage, and there were a bunch of disunified nomads, so just basically a bunch of wandering tribes, and the desert was very chaotic. But there were a lot of merchants and traders from Rome that had come and further east, and so it was important. It had a lot of exposure, but it just wasn't very organized. Muhammad begins to preach the revelations that he has in 615, saying that they had come from Allah, or the one God, who was the only God. His core message was a call he said was to submit, which was salama or Islam, to God's will. So this is the core of the Islamic message. Muhammad's forced hijrah, or departure from Mecca, marked the beginning of an independent movement. He gathered all his followers into an ummah, or community of the faithful. He was forced out because of his ideas went up against the polytheistic religions of the other members of his community, and so he ends up making some converts and making some friends and ends up going to Mecca. And Mecca will be an important city in Islamic faith from that point forward. Muhammad says he's a prophet. He leads an army against his enemies, and he basically begins to unite the peoples in the Arabian area around him. And his former enemies become his allies because they realize he has the power to unite them. They destroy all the pagan shrines except one, and they rededicate that to Allah only. After his death in 632, his successors, they begin to be called caliphs. They continue the policy of leading raiding parties against their neighbors, creating a big dynamic empire. And there had been some confusion about how to choose successors, and this does lead to some issues within the Islamic faith as it's having some growing pains. But the successors are called caliphs. Jihad is a holy struggle. Pacifism is not preached in Islam, and that's why jihad is used for war on behalf of communities, but it doesn't just mean a war against your enemies. It's also a war against sort of the unholy inside of yourself. So it has more meanings than perhaps what you're familiar with it meaning today. Despite all the conflict between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, there are a lot of things in common. However, there is a difference between the role of sacred versus secular authority. In Islam, there is not a priesthood, at the head of an independent religious organization. There is not a separation between church and state. Religious communities sprang up in place of a state, whereas in most the areas where Christianity and Judaism sprang up, there was a division between church and state. There was a struggle for power after the early caliphs. There's a split in the Muslim community or the Islamic faith between the Shia, or the party of Ali, the son of Muhammad, and the Sunnis, or the larger Muslim community, which this still exists today. There's large scale of conversions of Christians to Islam in the Eastern Mediterranean, but a minority refused to do so. Muslims call Christians and Jews, among other people of the book. They view them as inferiors, but they are tolerated, and they force them to pay a special tax. There's discrimination and tension as a result. And Muslims, Christians, and Jews interact in this new multicultural environment. And so the three medieval civilizations that we have here are on this timeline here you got. So the key question we have again are: Christianity and Islam developed internal divisions, cultural and theological, that spawn intense hatred among those who share the faith. Then there's even more breaking up that occurs when Muslims become going into traditional Christian areas, converting a bunch of Christians and identifying other people as protected minorities. So, do monotheistic religions necessarily create an us versus them mentality? Is intolerance logically the result of a firm belief that one is right? And what do you think the consequences of this sort of thinking is for the future centuries? If you are a person of faith, what do you think this has done in the history of your own religion, or that you've seen in your, in the history that you've studied? Is there is intolerance the only result that's come of it? So just a little thought about that. And that is the end of this section.